Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Toby Birch, who is a senior investment manager at Gower Financial Services. We're going to review 2024 and possibly see what might happen in 2025. As ever, all opinions are personal and no investment advice is being given. Good to see you.
And you, Tony?
And I'm glad to hear that you had a good Christmas. And there we go. So let's start off with the stats because I was quite surprised actually. I thought, the outcomes were not going to be quite as good as they were. Looking at you like the FTSE 250, don't you?
It's quite useful for for like smaller mid cap
Yeah,
companies.
yeah. So that was showing an upward of 7.44% on the year. Um, are you surprised at that level
A
or?
little, yeah. The For a long time now, the small and mid sized companies have been struggling. And it's only really since the US election that we've seen any kind of traction in this part of the market. So far, it's all been about big companies, particularly in the USA,
Yeah.
leading the charge. So the FTSE's up a little bit more, 9%. And likewise, in other countries, that's a standard figure. What you tend to see is that the US has overtaken the headlines with massive returns for the second year in a row, and that's really down to about 10 stocks. Talking about the Magnificent Seven, there's now a new acronym called Batman,
Right.
which is including another US stock as well. But it's really been a fairly small number of companies that have led the charge. And to use an analogy, I liken it to generals on horseback, sort of shooting ahead, and the troops have been left behind. So it all looks very good, but in reality, there's very little breadth in the market still.
The Standard and Poor actually, as at the 4th of December, showed an increase on the year of 28%, which is pretty good going.
Yeah, and that's down again. It's literally not even 10 stocks that have been pushing it. The other 490 they've gone up a bit, but again, only since the Trump got re-elected.
So I mean, it
So
just goes to show Toby how a couple of companies can distort the whole thing. And you've often
exactly,
said that on the FTSE 100, haven't you?
yeah, and it's a bit like the Nifty 50 era of the 1970s, where it's just accepted that these big companies are going to be around forever and run the show. And at the time, America was very dominant in the world index, making up 70%. Then
Yeah.
that started a 20-year decline. And since then, we've had a bounce. It's now 75% of the world index. So these things often mark a turning point, but it's quite hard to time.
I was amazed to see how well the Nikkei in Japan had done, up 21% and beyond where it was in 1980, whatever it was.
At last, 89. That's right. I think I just about started in the city in but just the turn of 1990. And that, again, talking about turning points. And that was one for Japan where it just seemed that the Japanese could do no wrong. And at the time, they made up about 50% of the world index,
Yeah.
which is very impressive. And that then had a 25, 30-year decline. So whenever things look rosy on the surface, often that's the kind of the time when things turn around. But also, you've got to remember that much of the gain in Japan is based on yen weakness.
Yeah.
So if you had invested in sterling, you made about 8%, which is fine. But a lot of that is just like a translational effect. But when the pound's weak, it's good for the FTSE, and when the yen's weak, it's good for the Nikkei.
Yeah, the way that it goes. And finally, looking at the indices, Euro stocks, which is a sort of basket of European currencies,
Clarification.
8.35%. So they didn't do too well, did they?
Yeah, I mean, again, compared to the States, it's been relatively weak, but Europe is really this. Britain used to call this, was it the sick man of Europe? And now Europe is the sick man of
A
Europe.
second man of Europe. Absolutely, yeah.
It's harsh, but it's just this whole energy question and decarbonisation. It's
It's
just leaving
crazy.
Europe in a terrible position.
We've got
And
some points to talk about a bit
yeah,
later on. Looking at sterling against the euro, I was very pleased when we went down to visit the family that my
yeah.
pound was buying lots of euros.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's a tale of two cities there because pound's been strong against the euro because inflation's been a bit it's still pretty sticky in Britain and America.
Mm.
It's meant that we haven't been able to cut rates, or unlikely to cut rates that quickly next year. So the pound's been strong, but against the dollar, we peaked at 134 in September, and now we're down to 125. So we're behind
Yeah.
America, and Europe's
Yeah.
behind us effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Right. Come on to the subject of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, and
Wow.
of course, she did that CBI conference. No increase in tax or borrowings. Done a U-turn, and has got a dodgy CV to boot. In terms
Yeah,
of being an economist at the Bank of England.
of course, it's if you ever get a chance to watch Dominic Frisby, he's a comedian, he's also a financier. He does some very good skits of her CV, which are probably unrepeatable on this chat. But yeah, basically, if you're on the left and Labour, you can get away with anything. It doesn't matter if you curb the truth. You're in power, and no one's going to stop that. I mean, I'm sure there's some semantics involved when they're talking about tax increases. Was it for working people? And there's always the catch to it, which you don't quite appreciate at the time.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, they've just got fallen into the old habit of more tax or higher tax rates will bring more tax revenues. Of course, as we've discussed before, it's the exact opposite.
Yeah. It's talking about semantics. Of course, illegal immigrants became irregular ones, didn't they?
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. Do they think they're kidding on these things?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, something that is going to affect the economy in the forthcoming year is the increase in national insurance contributions for the employer. That's gone up a lot, and the minimum levels come down a lot, hasn't it?
So it's a case of if you put up these taxes for employers, it's going to employ less people.
Yeah.
And likewise with minimum wage, it's all very nice to put it up, and people at that level really need help. The effect is always the opposite of the initial approach, in that you put up these taxes, you put up minimum wage, and companies are going to turn to robotics and self-service tills, which for me is a massive bugbear. I'll always try and walk out of it. It's a good case. W.H. Smith, and as another shop in Guernsey, I look at W.H. Smith. I always turn to the other one because they've got human beings to talk to.
Yeah.
Same product.
Yeah.
I hope it in a way does boomerang back on companies that do follow this route. You sort of can't blame them, especially when they're owned by private equity firms. But I'd much rather deal with people. And if your business is so weak that it's based on a small increase in minimum wage, then it's kind of
it's got a
other
problem.
problems elsewhere, excess debt.
Yeah. But I have to say, with those robotic tills, I just go in and say, "Look, I'm old and stupid. Can you help me, please?" Look, I always get away with it.
Oh, good. I say, I want to be served, please. I'm not a member of your staff.
Oh dear. Now, the London Stock Exchange seems to be losing a lot of listings at the moment. And when we first came out with these notes before Christmas, one of the big boys to relist in the US was Ashtead. Views on that?
Yeah, it's just at a time when we need more property built. You've got property lending, construction lending firm has chosen the United States. They've been around listed on the FTSE for a long time, for decades.
Yeah.
And there's two elements behind it. First of all, you get better valuation in the States for your shares. So naturally, you want to do better for shareholders. But also, if you're earning a lot of your money there, it makes sense to relist in that country. And also, you can benefit from a greater director pay. I think director remuneration is far less in the UK. And they've also got a lot more share option schemes.
Yeah.
Which again, kind of, I wouldn't call it a virtuous circle, but if you've got higher share price, your share options are worth more. So it's natural that they're going to relist in the States. And we even lost out on ARM, one of the few tech companies in Britain listing in America in 2023.
Yeah.
Again, it's just becoming a bit of a ghost town on the London Stock Exchange.
When they relist like this, what currency do they use? Do they relist in sterling? Because I've noticed that my BP shares are done in dollars.
Yeah, that would be make sense for the location of the listing as well,
Yeah.
and yeah, because you've also got the benefit of having that greater trading volume and greater valuation. Yeah, again, virtuous circle is a term that comes to mind.
So would they reissue the shares in dollars, or would they stick to sterling? I'm not quite
Well,
clear on.
given that most of the earnings is in dollars, yeah, that makes sense
Yeah,
to
yeah,
dollarize the asset.
yeah, absolutely. Okay. Now, the next one, of course, is that utility basket case known as Thames Water.
Oh,
Which,
it's
you just can't believe it, can you? I mean, I don't think anyone intended when some of these utilities were privatized that we'd ever see the mess that, literally the mess that they
yeah.
get themselves into. Now, reading in the financial press, they're talking about haircuts and debts into equity. Can
Mm.
you please explain for the benefits of me and the audience?
So when you're lending money to these companies, you're effectively like any money lender. You've given the money, you expect interest payments in return, and then finally, when the bond matures, you get your money back, and it's really a position of power. But when the company runs out of money and is heavily indebted, instead of a virtuous circle, it's like a doom loop. Your credit rating goes down, your bonds become junk, like high yield, and you've got to pay yet more interest to cover your debt. So to reduce the debt levels, one suggestion is to make the bondholders hurt because they're normally the most senior
Mm.
when it comes to getting paid and when companies in trouble. So the idea is to convert an element of their debt into shares instead. So they share the risk. So it's called a haircut because they have a trim of the value of their bonds. So it's kind of it kind of sounds good, but ultimately, this reduces confidence in the company yet further. But it's all kind of last desperate measures to try and prop things up. And yeah, I think it will eventually get renationalised. Is my personal view.
But it'll cost, won't it?
Yeah, it's going to cost either way, and you can't have capital cities of swimming in sewage on the day of the boat race. You know what I mean?
No, that's right.
It's forced into a corner, and as you said, it was never the intention to make things worse than the government running it.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to seeing what happens there. Right, next one, Toby. Railway renationalisation.
Yeah,
Does
this
this
is
mean the return of the cheese sandwich?
so. Listen, yeah, so that or the pork pie was for those of a certain vintage will remember. I mean, this probably you probably know more than me about rail, but I believe in the King's Speech earlier this year, they're talking about the Great British Railways is something
Yeah.
like the new name. And the idea is that when a franchise comes up for expiry, rather than renewing it, that the government take over. And I think, to be fair, I think one of the examples that they gave was that Southeastern Railways has actually improved their timetables and
Yeah.
reduced cancellations. So I think initially it'll benefit, but over the long run, it tends to, where government's involved, there will be an element of decay and worsening services. And also the unions haven't gone away; they're still
No,
there.
they're still suggesting that they'd like to go on strike again, and
Yeah.
so it goes on. But with the railways, of course, they're doing it on the cheap, aren't they? Because they're not actually having to pay any compensation to the franchise
Yeah.
holders when the franchise expires.
Mm.
What interests me, as you know, all of the rolling stock is leased from people like, is it Porterbrook?
Okay.
And and,
Okay.
and so
You better than
I'm not quite sure where that fits in terms of the government, actually taking over the railway, because obviously they're going to have to pay leasing money to
mm.
Porterbrook, which presumably is offset by the fares.
Yeah. There's no way out of it. You're still going to have to get new parts and all this sort of infrastructure involved as
Yeah.
well. So that'll likely stay in place, I'd have thought.
And of course, we've seen the disaster, which is HS2, which seems to be sort of in bits and pieces, all scattered
Yeah,
between London and Birmingham, doesn't it?
it's kind of it's an allegory for the government. I think.
Yeah.
It's just, Yeah, not joined up is the word that comes to mind. I'm from the northwest, and I feel embarrassed when I'm sat there on trains with tourists because it's such awful rail
Yeah,
structure
and when
for
you sort of compare it with the French, the Germans, the
the
Swiss,
Swiss. Oh,
but I think the difference I found in the past is that generally speaking, the continental people tend to take a pride in their railway.
yeah, very
You
much
know,
so.
the workers take a pride in it, whereas not so sure that actually happens in Britain.
Yeah, it's just an element. I used to work for Swiss Bank, and it was an element of shame if the trains were literally seconds or minutes late,
Yeah,
and they'd generally apologise. But like the old days, the Japanese, where they kind of bow and apologise to shareholders for doing
very
it wrong.
sorry.
It's like, yeah, that's a bit extreme, but it'd be nice to get some, even compensation when things do go wrong.
Now, we're always banging on about local authority staff
Mm.
pension schemes.
Yeah.
And I saw a stat the other day, which was quite interesting. £1 in every £4 goes to supporting the pension schemes.
It's appalling, really. I mean, because you always get the propaganda, whether it's local or central government, that paying more tax means more hospitals and
Yeah.
education, and of course it's nonsense. It's about their pensions and their pay, and if it's kind of a parasitic relationship, really, because you got one element doing a lot of the work and another element creaming off the benefit. And not to say that all civil servants are bad. I know a lot
No,
of
no.
very fine ones and very hardworking, but there just seems to be a bigger and bigger bulge of the economy is now state driven, which I don't think is sustainable personally.
A new idea has come out that you cut the pension level and you increase the salaries.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, it'd be nice if we if we got that in the private sector as well, and just basically forced to accept a contract. But in the state sector, you'd go to court and say that you'd signed a contract, and
Hmm.
yeah, you can't budge. And doubtless the pay would be it'd be a lot of short term pain to make up for that. And yeah,
Well,
it
the
just
fact
seems to be a downside.
you're just fiddling around with the balance sheet, aren't you,
Yeah,
basically?
yeah,
You know, you're transferring one liability into another column, as it were.
yeah,
But
exactly.
it's one of those things. What's
Yeah.
your long-term view on private pensions?
But these are, again, keep talking about tax, but it's the flavour of the day. Is that I believe in the UK you won't be able to use them as an inheritance
No,
planning tool anymore.
no.
And maybe that'll happen in the Channel Islands as well. But I don't know. But
Shh.
the idea is that too late. I said it. I know. Cats out the bag. But yeah, expose it. The idea of pension schemes is for it to be used in your lifetime, and rather than being a tax planning tool, which is kind of fair enough. There are exceptions where people don't die on purpose. They don't mean to
Yeah.
die young, and they've got their pension pot raided at the first opportunity. So long term, I'm reasonably confident. I'm very happy about Channel Island pensions compared to the UK. And there's other aspects of confiscation you've got to be aware of, like if you go down the route of central bank digital currencies, you might get cash converted into these CBDC. Also in Europe, I believe pension schemes are forced to put a percentage of their assets into EU government bonds,
Yeah.
which again, it's another kind of confiscation. I'm sure wherever there's any money or earnings, it's just the government see it as a fair target to pilfer. Really.
Because with Guernsey, as you know, I've got a retirement annuity trust scheme at RATS.
Yeah.
Um, on the death of all of the pension people, they do take 20%, don't they, of what's left?
If I believe if you take in the lump sum,
Yeah.
then it becomes what's left is
Yeah.
was going to be taxed anyway.
Yeah, what's
So,
left is tax. So, I mean, if you sort of leave £500,000 in your pension scheme, they take 20% of that once
yeah.
you've got rid of all of the pension dependents.
Mhm.
So I mean, they're in front of the UK on that one. The only
Yeah.
difference is their tax rates are reasonable
Yeah, so far.
so far. So hope no one's listening.
Let's stop saying these things that keep coming
Let-
through.
Let's
I've got
move
it.
on to the world motor industry, Toby,
Oh, I
because
do.
that's another. Yeah, I sort of see that VW are closing
Mhm.
factories. Honda and Nissan may have to merge because what their products at the moment are unsustainable. It's a bit of a mess, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's still. If you look at the Honda Nissan merger, I mean, even when combined, they're still behind Volkswagen and
Yeah,
Toyota. So there was some discussion with the CEO about what's the point of it all really. And on the topic of Volkswagen, they're closing factories. It's back to this go woke, go broke element that this pursuit of government goals on decarbonising and electrification, which are themselves are very tenuous scientifically. It's just a cult where if you're in, for example, Europe, where the cult is in power, then he's got to follow orders, and
yeah.
ultimately, commercially, that will lead to failure, and this is what we're seeing.
But I mean, no one want. It seems that the vast majority of people do not want electric vehicles at this time.
Yeah,
They're more expensive. They have a higher depreciation rate. Their ranges are debatable and everything
yeah.
else.
And the
But
batteries, of course,
yeah,
burn.
but governments are actually sort of saying if you don't sell X number, we're going to fine you. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't see quite how that fits into a
yeah.
capitalist society.
Well, it doesn't. I think it's just part of the agenda to force everyone to public transport and almost kind of like a quasi-communist system of everyone having to have exactly the same.
Yeah,
And of course, that's fine if you don't have strikes, but if you have
yeah,
strikes, no one moves. But again, this is part of another agenda to try and make people, live within cities, these so-called 15-minute cities where
mm.
you can't have vehicles, can't go anywhere, and it becomes like a ghetto effectively, and it's a virtual and technical one, which again, people don't seem to be terribly bothered about the loss of freedom. They just kind of like walk into these things.
We've got the UK housing market on our list,
Yeah,
and of course they have pledged to build 1.5 million pounds, sorry, 1.5 million
yeah,
units within the next 5 years.
yeah.
Only trouble is who's going to build them? Because
Right. I
there
mean,
just are not that number of craftsmen around to put these things
no,
up.
exactly. It's less attractive for skilled Polish workers to come to the UK, for example. I mean, the target's not massively off what has been done in the past. I think it's
Well, what
about
has been promised, Toby, not necessarily
yeah,
performed. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
So it is a tough one. I mean, they're more likely to do it the Conservatives because being Labour, they'll be more sort of dictatorial
Yeah.
and will force things through. So I think that there is scope to get the permissions fast forwarded and to have, but have the land available. But
Yeah.
so what? You
If you haven't
need
got the
someone
workforce.
to dig holes, and
Yeah, absolutely.
you need
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
skill. And
Yeah.
again, that this push towards university education for the last 20, 30 years has left a massive gap. I mean, I know here in Guernsey, trying to get people to get even semi-skilled work done is very difficult. I mean, I've got my limits on DIY and plastering, but you need proper experts to do it. And
Yeah,
it's just not
I mean,
the
I'm just a basket case when it comes
I
to
know.
doing it. Good at deconstruction, good at
Yeah,
putting, not so good at putting. Well, I can't put stuff together. Let's
that's your
be
chef
honest
skills,
with
isn't it?
everybody.
Yeah.
Of course, the other problem that the UK's got in terms of the rental market is that a lot of landlords are going to be put under siege with inheritance tax,
Mhm.
and
That's
you
right.
can see them unloading, can't you?
Exactly. The because the inheritance tax bans are being frozen, it puts more and more landlords at risk of inheritance tax charges. So the temptation is just to sell off now while they
Yeah,
can,
yeah,
and bag the profits. Of course, the intention was to um, not to get more tax, but the idea is to have more rental property available. And of course, this has the exact opposite effect. So we reckon that about 10% of rental properties will come off the market through selling. So there's demand for property, but with less rental available, there's going to be more rental costs,
yeah.
and also
Rents
got
are going to go up,
higher
aren't they?
mortgage rates.
Yeah,
So of course, the people who can't afford housing are going to be even worse off. When the cost of living is rough too. So it's always unintended consequences. And again, politically, landlords make a good target as being sort of, greedy
yeah,
or
yeah.
um,
Nasty,
ruthless. Yeah, it's a
Dickensian. Yeah,
target, and of course, it affects poorer people more by carrying out this policy. But also with the getting back to the housing thing again, you've got to have carbon targets on buildings. So it's all this nonsense that makes life much more difficult in the UK.
Very much so. And then, of course, we've got to consider the farmers and the inheritance tax implications for them. I mean, that really, in my view, was a stupid thing to do because they're not going
I
to get that much in, but they're going
Yeah,
to destroy an awful lot of farms over the next 10
very
years,
much so.
whatever.
I
Yeah.
think it's actually it's worse than stupid. It's being done intentionally because everything starts in the States and works its way over the Atlantic. And what you see is that the likes of Bill Gates is
Yeah.
now the largest single landowner, and there's an agenda because he owns so much technology involved with factory produced food and lab produced meat and the like. I think the idea is for him to accumulate and sort of bank the land so it doesn't get used. And likewise in the UK, the idea would be for financial institutions to acquire the land, and then the farmers go back to being serfs. So
Yeah.
they don't own the land; they're just peasants
That's
who
right.
work on
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And it's an egregious attack on this very hardworking section of the population, terribly paid, underappreciated, and there's big money interests involved in what's going on. And again, we're the ones who suffer. There's also nonsense about giving cows this medication to reduce methane output. I mean,
We won't use the F word.
no, it's beyond absurd. Again, it's not just a cult of politically. It's this climate change cult, and it infests every part of the network. And again, this is driven by the World Economic Forum, who have these bonkers ideas that they're trying to impose on the rest of us. But
Yeah. And I mean, talking, continuing on the decarbonising bit, we've got Mr. Miliband in charge of that, and the actual cost is horrendous. And quite interestingly, I see that the Germans have built a whole load of offshore windmills. Okay. But their grid is incapable of supporting the additional capacity.
Yeah, it's just it's hard to describe the insanity, but when you're using the word cult, there is no logic, and it's just one-way traffic. And of course, these things don't work without subsidies, which is another cost going forward. I mean, I'm a big fan of fossil fuels. Carbon is the most important element of life and is a negligible part of the atmosphere. And it's absurd to demonize it.
Yeah, you get on very well with my friend Chris Gibson Smith, who is very much of the opinion that whilst man contributes a bit, it isn't necessarily, the reason why we're suffering weather-wise as we are. So
that's right. Of course, that's a very good point, because meteorologists who study weather patterns aren't all convinced some man-made climate change fanatics. In fact, when this first survey was done, saying 97% of scientists say it's man-made, the actual author of the survey stripped out the response from meteorologists to make sure it's all one way. And it's all about manipulation and getting it's classic thing saying a scientist says, therefore it must be true. It's rubbish.
Yeah. I mean, scientists are like economists, aren't they? You can give them the same problem and they come up with two separate answers.
Yeah, and of course there's the massive conflict of interest of funding. I mean, I've got two climate scientists in my family. I've got another who's a cancer specialist at Oxford, and they spend their lives flying around the world trying to get funding. The thing is, the people who provide the funds are typically foundations, from the likes of Bill Gates, who have an agenda, and so science has really been bought out for a long time now, and we're the ones who suffer from it. So I feel very sad. I did a basic science degree, and I thought finance was more attractive. But I feel embarrassed to see the way that people just believe what they're told and never step back and say, where's the conflict?
Well, that's right.
Scientists, like doctors, have angel wings, and it's really not the case at all.
Yeah, very much so. We're running a bit short on time, unfortunately. Okay. So I think what we should skip on and talk about the Trump effect in terms of tariffs, peace, China's worries, etc.
Okay, I think the people always take President Trump at face value and kind of they always get very sort of wound up by him. It's really just a negotiating tool, and he may well use some tariffs, but he's more interested in having a greater degree of globalization, but on America's terms. So in the past, globalization went too far and outsourced everything to other countries. But there are benefits to it, particularly with regard to inflation. So he'll do it his way and use the tariffs to, to keep the Chinese at bay where he feels fit. But China's moved on really from being a sweatshop, and having studied Mandarin for a while and got to know quite a few wealthy Chinese people, they see themselves as being a distinct entity that is less and less reliant on America.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably the most respectful way to think of it. They're more of an equal partner, but they've got their own interests, and it's like the mercantilists of the past. You've got to compete to stay ahead and match them. Just demonizing other countries like Russia and China, saying they're evil, really doesn't help.
Do you think he'll sort out Ukraine?
I think it's a far greater chance of reaching a peaceful
Yeah.
settlement sooner. Unfortunately, the previous government was so controlled by the Washington swamp, which is made of very sort of sinister globalists who are effectively pure warmongers. I mean, I've got my son's in the military. I've got a lot of family in it, and I don't particularly want war, but they do.
Yeah.
And again, it comes back to the conflict of interest, and they have interests in weapons manufacturing, and it's okay for people to die as long as it's not their family.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians get killed in a bloodbath. It's disgusting to see, and hopefully that in future Trump will go some way to draining the swamp, because he didn't make much of a go of it last time, to be honest.
Of course, you've got this private army, Wagner, in Africa, and they were involved in Ukraine for a while. I mean, and of course, Putin's imported a few North Koreans, I believe.
Well, I mean, we've got troops on the ground as well, and there's a push for trying to get. You're not meant to have a country at war joining NATO, and they're trying to. The Washington swamp are trying to trigger a war, even in his last months before the handover. Last weeks. So they just have no shame, and they'll happily sacrifice other people, for their benefit. So yes, overall, I'm hopeful that this warmonger will come to a stop, and we go back to one point of peace.
Yeah. I mean, as I see it, no one's ever going to win that war.
No, absolutely not.
Ukraine are not going to get back the bits that Russia have taken, and Russia is not in a situation to take over the whole country. So you've just got to you've got to be reasonable and rational and say, well, look, we really need to sue for peace on the best possible terms.
It's like we did our own. Also, when Yugoslavia broke up into linguistic regions, and that part of Ukraine where Russia are now is mostly Russian. The Russian people there were subject to effectively a form of apartheid beforehand, and it was a very brutal place to be a Russian. So you'd only ever see it from our point of view, never from the Russian side. But I think you're right. Some realpolitik and just getting the war over will be a massive help to the world economy.
Now, looking in the Toby Birch crystal ball 2025, what are your hopes?
Again, this war element is the biggest one for me. That if we can go back to being more seeking peace, but not being weak about it, doing it on an equal basis, this will really benefit the world globally, help the commodity prices and inflation. So I'm pretty hopeful from that point of view. But from the stock markets aspect, we've had 2 years in the States of about 25% returns each year. There's only 1 year going back for decades where you've had a third good year after that kind of run. But you also got to remember they've got the interest rate cutting cycle, and that's good for markets as well. So if you have a weaker dollar, that would help too. So there's lots of elements that can come together to improve stock market performance. And also the bond market's being beaten up yet again. So if they stabilize, you find that rather than just having a few big names shooting ahead, lots of other assets will benefit as well, and other sectors of the stock market. So overall, I'm pretty positive. And I think it'd be simplistic to compare this with the sort of 1990s tech bubble. It is generally different from earnings and the like. So overall, pretty good, I think.
Good. Well, I'm pleased to hear that. Can I take this opportunity of thanking you and wishing you a very happy new year?
You too.
And can I book you for April 2025?
Of course, yes. Oh, it's not April 1st. It's okay.
Toby, it's been a delight. Thank you so much. And,
Jenny,
I'm really grateful for all you've done over the year with me because, you put a lot of things into perspective, which is
different
important.
slants, perhaps. Yeah.
Take care, mate.
Thanks, mate. Cheers.
Cheers.